20 minutes. Go ahead.
Can you all hear me? Fantastic. Let me share my screen really quickly. Oh. Okay. Oh, no, that's not what I want. There we go. Okay, can you all see everything? Sorry.
Yeah, everything is.
Yes.
Okay, because I can't, now I realize I can't see you all. So I'm sure you all are giving me thumbs up. And I'm realizing I can't see you at the same time. But so if you have questions or anything, just shout out. I'm gonna start my timer here too, so that I am conscious of that. All right, well, hello everybody. I would say good morning. I am coming to you all from Illinois in the States. So it is 9 o'clock in the morning and it's snowing over here. My name is Abby Williams Chin. I'm currently an MFA candidate and a teaching assistant at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, studying dance with a minor in gender and women's studies. And my research that I'll be presenting today centers around the inevitability of mothers becoming monsters in society. So for this, I look to the obvious place of horror films. I am curious about how we write the stories of our mothers. What narratives have we culturally constructed around our mothers and this idea of motherhood? And what reinforces those expectations of those roles? So horror films, there are many mother figures in horror films. This is an example from the film Mama from 2013. But if you think about, Friday the 13th, another mini spoiler alerts for this. The mother is the killer. There is The Conjuring where the mother becomes possessed. There are many, many, many iterations of this, particularly in American horror films. And as I was getting into this research, I was delving further into why that is. Why are we so obsessed with this monstrous mother that turns on her children? And thinking about particularly American horror film is considered to be a lower brow form of entertainment. It's typically low budget and the focus is not as much on our filmmaking as it is on making money. But with this, I think there's a lot of commentary on how society perceives certain peoples and roles and expectations. There's so many tropes in American horror film about the Black character always is the first one to die, and then the white virgin and the children always make it to the end. And so looking at this, looking at these stereotypes, typically in these films, these stereotypes are pretty static. But with the mother figure, the mother is mutable throughout. So she usually starts as an innocent of the haunting and then transitions to be part of the monster, part of the ghost, haunted or possessed herself. And I argue that this is how we perceive transitions for people from individual person into mothers and that relationality, and how we expect self-sacrifice, and how we expect self-sacrifice, and it's revered in mothers, but is it sustainable? I argue that it is not, and therefore mothers become perceived as monsters when they cross this invisible barrier. So this is me. And my son. I gave birth to my son a little over a year ago, and this is kind of the impetus for my research in this. I had a very tumultuous beginning to motherhood. It seemed to me unacceptable to need space and time to myself or to pursue ambitions and continue my degree or anything outside of the home. I was consistently questioned for being anywhere other than next to my son or not bringing him with me to any event. Um, and this internal battle between what I needed physically and emotionally and how people around me expected me to react were at odds. And so I began to question, am I also destined to become a monster? So as I said, I am pursuing a degree in dance. And so it is how I understand the world is through my body. And so this research is an amalgamation of choreography and physical exploration, as well as written research by brilliant scholars and investigating my own personal experiences in motherhood. Um, so this is me. These are initial movement explorations from about 6 months ago. This particular research will be presented in a 20-minute choreographic work featuring 9 undergraduate dancers from the University of Illinois to be presented in January of 2023. So this research is guided by the visceral sense and to identify that visceral sense and visceral experience of early motherhood. What did early motherhood feel like in my body? What does it feel like to become a monster? So the movement is an interplay between monstrous, uncanny physicality and touches on ideas of touch between comfort and support and smothering touches. Also draws on historical dance references from Petipa's Giselle and other rageful, ghostly figures in ballet, as well as the very physical experience of gestating and birthing a child that I did. So how am I defining monster in this? So I look to Eve Tuck in her glossary of haunting. She defines monsters as one who's been wronged and seeks justice. Monsters show up when they are denied, yet there is no understanding the monster. She argues that monsters are created from circumstance over time, that they don't arrive from nothing. And they make themselves known at the moment they need to be addressed. So here are the circumstances that mothers are currently facing in the United States. So $10,808 is the average cost of a vaginal birth in the United States. It's closer to $30,000, including pre and postnatal care, and can be much higher if there are any complications or emergency C-section is necessary. 3.5 million women, or 45% of mothers of school-age children in the US, exited the workforce between March and April of 2020. Obviously, this was due to the pandemic and all of our schools being shut down. But in that moment where the public systems were failing mothers, the mothers were the ones who left the workforce as opposed to the fathers, or a 50-50 split of parents. It is perceived that the default parent is the mother in this situation. And so the mothers were the ones to leave the workforce when extra childcare was needed at home. 41% of employed Americans perceive working moms to be less devoted to their work, and 1/3 of them and 1/3 of employees judge mothers for needing a more flexible schedule. And that this might just seem like a bottom line concern for employers of needing their employees to be at work, but the statistics say that 4% is what's lost in women's hourly wages per child, while men's earnings increased by 6% after becoming fathers. So this is with the statistics perceived to be a mother issue and not necessarily an issue of parental leave or parental understanding. So with supporting a household of children on a single income becoming less possible in the United States, mothers are put in an impossible situation. They're not allowed the bodily autonomy to decide whether or not to become mothers with the overturning of Roe v. Wade in the United States, which previously protected the right to abortion. That is no longer federally protected. And then they were required to provide publicly unconditional love and support for the child while being responsible for their safety and whereabouts round the clock for 18 years, and also being required to work in workplaces where coworkers will constantly be annoyed by perceived impending inconveniences. And then there's the expectation of demeanor. So on one side here, we have June Cleaver, which is kind of a stereotypical white middle class mother from sitcoms in the 1950s. And then on the other side, we have the Babadook, which I relate more closely with. This idea of also unacceptable rage in mothers. All of these circumstances piling up and becoming unsustainable most likely will translate into some form of anger. And it is not also, it is also a biological imperative. 15% of birthing mothers will experience some form of postpartum mood disorder, including depression, anxiety, or even psychosis. But many mothers allow this rage to fester below the surface, growing over time, but it cannot be suppressed forever and eventually takes its toll. I argue this is how monsters are created. I also want to point out in this research, I attempt to define motherhood as distinctly different from parenthood, as parenthood and fatherhood have very different expectations and implications. I seek to frame the argument around the construct of motherhood and not the individual mothers themselves. Adrienne Rich describes the distinction between the experience of motherhood and the institution of motherhood in her book Of Woman Born. The experience being her personal understanding of raising children as a scholar, a poet, and a human being, while the institution is imposed on mothers as a means of patriarchal control. While Rich does argue in his 1976 work that all women are seen primarily as mothers or potential mothers, I believe many of her assertions can be opened up to be more inclusive of non-binary understanding of gender as well. As we understand the dominance of the patriarchy is more complex than men versus women, I believe motherhood can be interpreted more broadly than a symptom felt by people that only identify as cis women. While I'm discussing the institution of motherhood as a whole, it is also important to consider the various intersections that affect individual experience of motherhood. While Rich argues that motherhood is societally imperative for women, not all motherhood is seen as socially valid. So as Kathy Cohen explores the way that queerness exists in the realms of heterosexuality, in her quote here, how would queer activists understand politically lives of women, in particular women of color, on welfare, who may fit into the category of heterosexual, but whose sexual choices are not perceived as normal, moral, or worthy of state support? So that motherhood that exists outside of that wealthy, cis, white, heterosexual, legally bound realm is vilified for its mere existence without taking any actions that might be considered controversial. So while motherhood is not a monolith, I hope to draw on generalizations and tropes and assumptions that are societally pervasive and also personally felt. So this is my mother and me. My mother is, by all accounts, a very accomplished woman. She is one of the top obstetrician and gynecologists in her state, typically getting annual awards in that category. She is an elder in the church. She is active in the community. She is member of a Pilates studio. She runs multiple book clubs and a patron of the arts. And I believe that I cannot fully understand all that she is. As I've distilled her in my mind, I've uncomplicated her to fit a clean narrative of who she is so I can establish a clean narrative for myself. I can only think of her in relationship to myself, and therefore I fail to comprehend fully every capacity that she inhabits. I think that mothers that place value on life outside the home are illegible. This idea that we value the home life much more, and so this idea that they have full lives and breadth outside of that is sorry, it makes them illegible. Oops, sorry.
Yep, do continue.
Oh, okay, sorry. I couldn't see it. I could only hear something was going on. I was making sure we're good. Okay. Yes. So in my mind, I've created my mother with no sense of nuance, no understanding of her as a holistic human being. And I relate this to mothers in horror films. They're often not afforded backstories or generational trauma. They're either seen as saint or monster, and there is no understanding of an in-between. Because of this, my mother, as I have created her in my mind, is a mix of her actions, other people's mothers I have met, and mothers in horror films, and my overall understanding of how mothers should behave. So through this process of confabulation, as Lisa Genova describes here, it's essentially a form of memory error that is constructed through your eager to believe anything subconscious memory, that the original memory can no longer be reliable as a factually accurate account. So your brain essentially can riff on a memory and add in other information from outside sources to create a completely new memory that contains a lot of other information and creates this factually inaccurate account. So in this way, I've psychologically condensed my mother into a neat narrative instead of allowing the messiness and gray area of motherhood and humanness to resonate. She's more of a fabrication of expectations, either met or not, than a fully formed person with reasons, ambitions, or desires.
Okay, so sorry to interrupt for just a second. You have 2 more minutes.
Okay. I somehow had 4 on my timer. Okay. So as Tuck states that monsters cannot be vanquished, they can only be deferred, I look to Avery Gordon's understanding of haunting. So here's her quote about haunting. It is this idea that it can linger. It makes itself known when it needs to be dealt with, but it can never be vanquished. It is something we learn to live with. And that for me has been a method of understanding how we cope with these anxieties. I knew that I wanted to become a mother, but I knew that I also did not want to enter the institution of motherhood. I really relate to Adrienne Rich's quote here. I was haunted by the stereotype of the mother whose love is unconditional, and by the visual and literary images of motherhood as a single-minded pursuit. If I knew the parts of myself existed that would never cohere to those images, weren't those parts then abnormal or monstrous? So what is the consequence of this? I believe that the true anxiety of motherhood for me has been able to find comfort or even acceptance in the in-between spaces that are vital to understanding motherhood. I can reject the institution of motherhood because being a mother often lies outside the bounds of the quotidian. It seems so counterintuitive that a role that is assumed to be inevitable of many women lies outside the normative, but is this paradox that creates these monsters. So the consequences of this are mothers feeling banished to dark corners, the hills, and under the bed of society to lurk quietly in shame and silence. So this is a rehearsal video of the final performance that will be presented in January. And I'm continuing to explore all of these ideas choreographically. The great challenge of this choreographic process for me is how to explore extremes in the in-between spaces, because it seems counterintuitive. But could the thin boundary between mother and monster allow this to be possible? I'm particularly interested in the experiential journey of becoming a monster, and how does one reckon with that permanent transition? And this deep sense of loss of identity, isolation, confusion, anger, and fog happiness. I find the only way to cope with Tuck's unbanishable monsters. It is the only way for me to reconcile the haunting most mothers feel of, am I doing this right? And I synthesize all of this information through my body to better understand this and make friends with the monsters.
Thank you very much. You're right in time, and I'm sure there will be questions. But as with the other sessions, we leave the questions and answers to the end of the session. So we will hear the remaining two speakers first, and then we will have a discussion. So Eine, now it's time for you to speak about the Philippine monsters as exhibited in culture and language. And well, once again, you have 20 minutes to do it in. We're all ears.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. Good afternoon in Poland. And my name is Aine. I'm a comparative literature major. And my talk is about the development of Philippine monsters from folklore to modern day slang. So these are some examples of monsters, the old monsters that were revisioned in modern times. Follow me on Instagram, aina.kin, and on YouTube, Paper Monster Press. So before I start, another disclaimer. Philippine folklore, it's vast and ever-changing landscape. So we can't really kind of narrow down what folklore is. Our folklore, it's very vast because we have 130 plus ethnic groups in the Philippines. And each one, they have their own stories. We have 120 plus languages. Although we do have a national language, which is called Filipino, it's borrowed from many they borrow words from many languages. Now, some of the translations will never be exact. Like I will show you some examples of monsters that we have, and some of them are similar to tribes. Some of them are similar in tribes, and some of them are commonly known. But again, when they pass down as a text, when they're written as a text and they're translated to English or Filipino, the languages that I understand, the translations are never exact. Another thing, another reason why our folklore can't be, it's like a shapeshifter as well, is that it only survives by oral. Some folklore traditions only survive by oral tradition. So some of the languages aren't written down, and some of our languages are dying because nobody speaks them anymore. So these are the complications that we encounter when we talk about Philippine culture and folklore. Two other reasons are that many pre-colonial texts. So pre-colonial refers to the times before the Spaniards came and colonized the Philippines, and they had many different languages. Some of these are during the Spanish regime and destructions of many places during the wars. So American War, Japanese War, etc. Now, we also peg babaylans, which is the original storytellers, as witches. So we kind of demonize the storytellers. Okay, those are the scope and the limitations. Now, let me share with you the definition of monsters, which we call in Tagalog or Filipino as halimaw. A monster is a terrifying or dangerous creature. A monster is a beast or a ferocious animal. A monster can also be a brutal person or a beast-like person or a very talented or intelligent person, which is when we say somebody is a halimaw ka, it can, depending on the connotation in which it's used, it's either you're very, like you're brutal, your personality is like a monster, or you're so fierce and you're so intelligent that like you're monstrous. So it can be negative or positive. Now, by the way, I've been showing you some photos of some monsters that we have. This is the Katao, the Visayan version of the mermaid. Now, let me tell you, the Philippines is composed of three islands, three main islands: Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao. And the ethnic groups, too many to mention. And now, what is the role of monsters? This, by the way, is a sari manok, another monster that we have. The monster is an embodiment of our fears, desires, and inner anxieties. So we assign to them our repulsive nature. So if we think about the original Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde actually became a separate person, a separate identity, because Dr. Jekyll, like he didn't want to face his monstrous personality. It can also be like the picture of Dorian Gray, wherein Dorian Gray himself, he was unchanging. He was ever youthful. He was ever handsome. But his portrait was becoming more and more repulsive. It was getting old, like it had all these sores, and which really showed his repulsive nature. Now, monsters are also a guidepost or a boundary of what is and what is not acceptable to modern society, and even pre-colonial times. So for us, what is acceptable is that we stick to the boundaries that are ascribed by society, and if you go beyond that, you're an outcast, which is close to actually being a monster, because in olden times, if you're out of a tribe, you can't survive, right? And the role of monsters is also to show that we are the monsters. That, as spoken by one of the earlier speakers, in the main room, actually the monsters show that we are the monsters. So now I want to give a few minutes to talk about the subversive nature of horror. Fear is often used as a subtext to put people in their place. And if you have ever read about Philippine history, you will know that we've been through so much. There was martial law. We were under the dictatorship for a lot of years, for more than 20 years. We were colonized by the Spaniards, briefly by the Portuguese, briefly by the Americans, briefly by the Japanese, and now the Philippines, we suffer abject poverty. So think of it like India or like Bangladesh. We used to be one of the countries. We used to be one of the countries in Asia that was like a rising star, but we're no longer that. So all of these subtexts that we have, like political and all of that, fear is used as a subtext for that. And I will speak about this more later on. Now, there was a story that the Japanese actually spread tales of werewolves in the Philippines to stop people from going out at night and meeting. And the importance of this is that guerrilla movements were trying to develop during these times, during meetings at night. So what happens is that horror becomes a space. These horror stories, these tales about demigods and mythical beings, they actually become a space where people confront fear. So this is actually the subversive nature of horror. Now, I will give you a few examples wherein Philippine monsters show our national identity. So this is a photo of the Ibong Adarna. It not only shows our national identity, it shows our resilience as a nation. It shows that we are humorous. By the way, the Philippines is one of the happiest nations in the world. And if you ever visit the Philippines, everybody has a smile on their face. And in fact, the slogan for our Department of Tourism is, "It's more fun in the Philippines." You guys should visit. So the Ibong Adarna is a mythical bird. It would enchant man with her singing voice, and then it would poop on them, and they would turn into stone. So, so it's kind of like our version of Medusa, but here it's actually a giant singing bird. So now this bird is popularized. It's now the name of a publishing house, the Adarna Books. We also have a monster which is called the Baconawa, and I meant to, I'm sorry, I meant to edit this. It's said to swallow the moon and cause an eclipse, not the sun. It's meant to swallow the moon. So what people would do, tribal people, they would beat on the drums and they would make a parade, they would make a procession, okay, so that they will scare the Bakunawa and it would spit out the moon. And they actually did this before. Now, this is the quintessential Philippine monster. I didn't put the I didn't put like the horrifying the actual horrifying image of the aswang because it might scare you. It's too scary. It's a man or a woman. They rub oil on their bodies. It's a magic oil, obviously, and this magic oil allows them to detach from the waist up. And once they detach, they leave their legs behind the banana tree, and their upper half would fly looking for something to eat. They like fetuses, by the way. So if you can picture this, our roofs, the olden times, the roofs of the houses in the Philippines are made from nipa. So nipa is a kind of palm. So if you can picture the long tongue of this aswang, it would go down through the holes in the nipa hut and it would suck the fetus right out of the belly of the mother. So yeah. So yeah. Now, the CIA was purported to have used the myth of the aswang to get the hooks. Now, the hooks were the guerrillas, the hook balahaps, to lay down their arms. And actually, it was said that they succeeded because the hook stopped going to the mountains when they saw that there were many people who died purportedly from the aswang attacks, because the aswang is like a vampire. It's a shapeshifter. It's like a vampire as well. So it could literally, although their favorite food is fetuses, they can suck you dry through the throat, same as the original vampire. But I think ours is more scary. So now you can see how the mythical goes into the territory of the political, and how our landscape, our historical landscape, is peopled with these myths and legends. Interesting, huh? So then we also have this guy, he's called the Tikbalang. He's half man, half horse, okay, like the centaur, like the Greek centaur. And he likes doing is to lead travelers astray. So if you're ever going like to the forest in the Philippines, by the way, don't do that because definitely so many people, it's like a jungle. So many people are led astray, and they go around in circles. Now, it's said that it's the Tikbalang who does this. So, a tip for you, if you ever find yourself in the jungles of the Philippines, you're supposed to turn your shirt inside out, okay? Take off your shirt and put on the wrong side. Uh, put it on from the wrong side. And this is supposed to help lead you out of the maze. So I'm not sure if you, yeah, well, try it. If you ever get lost, try that. I'm not sure if it's specific only to the Philippines. I'm sure, try it if you get lost sometime. Now, when it is raining and the sun is shining, it is said that tikbalangs are getting married. So, in Japan, this phenomenon is attributed to the foxes. So, if the sun is shining somewhere and it's also raining, so tikbalangs and foxes are getting married. And now we have this being, which is called a berkakang. It's a giant fish, and it swallows our local hero, whom we call Lamang. It also spit him out, by the way. So he's actually, Lamang is this is our version of Jonah and the whale. And of course, there are a lot of moral stories, there are a lot of moral uh, there's a lot of moral lessons that you can learn from these stories that we have. One, which is to like don't go swimming in the deep sea. Yeah, that's a lesson that we learn. I mean, for Lamang, not for Jonah. Jonah's is quite different. We also have a being called the Sirena. Now, this is a beautiful woman, shaped like a woman, from the head to the waist, and from the waist down, it has the lower body of a fish. Now, there are some places in the Philippines where the river and the sea meet, and this creates a whirlpool. This is the place where the Sirenas are supposed to. This is the place where the Sirenas are supposed to call home. And in fact, near to where I was born, there was this whirlpool, and the local people actually say that the Sirena lives there, and they have they claim a child or a handsome young man once every year to take home to their watery abode. So nowadays, the sirena is used in our local culture to refer to a gay person or gender fluid person. I think they call it now gender fluid, because the way that the sirena is, or like the shokoy, which is the male version of the sirena, they're half man, not half man, half woman, but half person, half fish. So this kind of creates the gender fluidity in the sexuality of the sirena, or our modern sirenas, which are the gay people, if it's politically correct to call them that. And this is the Tagalog creator deity. He's called Bathala. So he was supposed to have made everything. Like he created the earth, the heavens, etc. So he's like our god. And the phrase bahala na, or come what may, or que sera sera, is taken from this dude. And it's literally originally called God will take care, or Bathala na. And then over the years, it became Bahala na. I used, by the way, all these drawings are modern interpretations of what our monsters looked like. The older versions are definitely more horrifying. So this is Tala. She's the goddess of the stars and also the daughter of Batala. And Tala literally means star. If you're like somebody who's like monstrous, you have monstrous talent. Like you have star talent if you call somebody Tala. So in conclusion, because if I tell you all the stories that we have, it will take well, the whole conference, and I don't want to hug it. Um, Telling stories is a tribal instinct, and it makes us human. Now, in our country, we love telling stories. We have people specifically who will tell you the stories. These are the Babaylans, the priestesses, the Omalahokans, also the priestesses, but in another tribe. And these people, they are often ascribed, they have great value in the society. Okay, they're often the bridge between the gods and the common people. They interpret dreams. They interpret what we're supposed to do, like for the harvest, going to war, getting married, etc. So they're actually the people who bridge. They are the people who bridge the natural and the supernatural. So they are very, very important during the tribal times. Nowadays, I suppose this can be social media. They have the status of like the newspaper people. And the second thing that I wanted to say was that oral tradition is incantatory. It has the mystique of an incantation, and sometimes the oral tradition is kept alive because the people keep telling the stories. If they stop telling the stories, do the stories still exist? We don't know, right? The other conclusion that I wanted that I draw from this paper or this presentation is that you look through problems through the lens of horror, and then you know that there are creative ways to escape the problem or to try to get out from the problem. And the people or the situations that tell you that these are possible are the old myths and the old legends, because from the old myths and the old legends and the monsters, we know that people, like, they are stronger than we know, they're more intelligent, they're wittier, they're clever. So all of these, like all of these tales of escape and rebellion, um, this these are a good thing to take in our psyche, because it shows that the human spirit is indomitable. Like the human spirit is literally on fire, and all the stories only support that, like that truth. And the last thing is that fear sparks rebellion, and we see this in our country. It's very the personal and the political and the mythical, as I have only I've brushed upon it, but like if you look at it deeply, it's all intertwined. And the fear sparks rebellion. And actually, I'm taking a quote from Star Wars: rebellions are built on hope. So if you have that, like if you have the spark to rebel, you know that the human spirit doesn't give up. So this is why we have the stories. It's not actually to create monsters, but it's actually for us, for our souls, because it's good for us to know that the human spirit will is indomitable and will rise up no matter what the challenges or circumstances. And that's it. Thank you. Q&A. If you have questions.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I'm sure there will be questions. We just have one more presentation to listen to before we get to that part of the session. Thank you very much. Eva, now it's your time to talk about the cancel culture. We had the notion of politically correct language mentioned briefly in the previous presentation. So let us just move on into the cancel culture as a monstrous thing.
Thank you very much. I have a terrible sore, like a cough and sore throat, so I'm gonna be taking like sipping breaks, okay? So I apologize in advance, and I'm gonna be timing myself as well. All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Um, I will start with a situation that sort of made me think a couple of months ago. It was when Vladimir Putin compared Russian and his situation to that of J.K. Rowling and her being cancelled by the Western culture and media after supporting anti-trans tweets and beliefs. Right. So he said, and I quote, "They cancelled J.K. Rowling recently, the children's author. Her books are published all over the world, but they cancelled her just because she didn't satisfy the demands of gender rights." The end of the tweet by Vladimir Putin. I can't believe I'm quoting him. Um, Perhaps it would have meant more if Russia did provide anti-discrimination protections for LGBT plus people, but it doesn't. Nor does it prohibit hate crimes based on sexual orientation and gender identity. What is more, there are currently no laws prohibiting discrimination based on gender identity or expression, and a recent law could only discriminate against transgender residents. So this is the first point. And the second point is a response from the allegedly cancel writer, because J.K. Rowling tweeted back at Vladimir Putin. Oh, these are fun times. She said, critiques of Western cancel culture are possibly not best made by those currently slaughtering civilians for the crime of resistance or who jail and poison their critics. Hashtag I stand with Ukraine. End of her tweet. Um, so who then is to criticize the quote Western cancel culture unquote? Has J.K. Rowling been uncancelled by Putin, and what does it all mean? So this was a sort of inspiration for my contemplation upon the matter. Um, the term cancel culture or call out culture or outrage culture has been kind of a buzzword applicable to things, services, and most importantly, people. It is a manifestation of power that society or a collective wields over an individual. The latter is not, however, a blameless victim. They must have transgressed or broken the social contract or taboos, and in consequence, they were punished by being shunned, avoided, excluded, ignored, exiled. The concept in itself, of course, is not something that's shockingly new. Starting with the ancient Greece and its radical ostracism. In Athens, for instance, the culprit was to leave the city for even 10 years, or to more recent examples, as for instance, Kanye or Ye, I don't know, I think he changed his name, inciting his fan base to torment Pete Davidson when he was dating or allegedly dating his soon-to-be ex-wife. Um, so in this paper, I argue that contemporary cancel culture may be detrimental to both the individual and the collective, and that actually we should all cancel culture, if that makes sense. The way the ancient Greeks would exile a person was rather simple. So a citizen would write down the name of a person they perceive as a threat to democracy. That's also very important. It was only when a person was posing a threat to democracy, and the person with most votes would be sent off. However, the contemporary setting for cancel culture takes place, or at least two strata. And one of them, I think we've already sort of brushed upon in previous panel. So the first strata where it may happen is the tangible layer with working environment, earning, paying taxes, showing up to parties, speaking to a limited number of people. And there is this other layer. There is this media and social media with millions of followers. Cancel culture usually takes place within the latter. And it is also social media where people may witness the very moment one makes a mistake, paving the way for being cancelled. So everything is happening sort of in front of our eyes. Everything is happening live, or the tweets and Instagram and TikToks and whatnot. Social control and pressure are useful tools used to regulate social relations. The so-called soft tools may take a form of derision of humiliation in front of many eyes, and between the real person and their sort of digital, carefully curated persona, of course, the latter will dominate and take down the real person, which is a very interesting phenomenon when our digital self, our avatar, if you will, on Facebook, on other social media, may actually destroy the life of, the real I that happens to make a mistake. Cancel culture has been described by media studies scholar Eve Ing as a quote, a collective of typically marginalized voices calling out and expressing the censor of a powerful figure, end of quote. The said figure is usually guilty of expressing sexist, racial, homophobic, or anti Semitic views, or have done or said something considered objectionable or offensive. And once the public comprehends the situation, they withdraw support for that person or a brand or a service. The attempts to ostracize, usually a celebrity, have brought about diversified results. I am inclined to believe that the idea behind cancel culture is noble and has only or had only a positive change in mind. Call out culture has been used as a part of Me Too movement, which of course in Me Too movement gave men and women the ability to call out their abusers on a forum where the accusations would be heard finally, especially against very, very powerful individuals. Additionally, the Black Lives Matter movement, which seeks to highlight inequalities, racism, and discrimination in the Black community, repeatedly called out Black men being killed by police officers. Um, so it is not to say that cancel culture failed completely. I do not think that, and I do not argue that, because monsters like Harvey Weinstein and Bill Cosby did face the consequences of their actions and have been prosecuted following the rise of Black Lives Matter movements and Me Too as well. And of course, such instances have inspired powerful protests for racial and social justice, overdue demands for police reforms, along with wider calls for greater equality and inclusion across our society or societies, not least in higher education, journalism, philanthropy, and the arts. So across the board, I believe it did bring out the sort of positive results. Even though cancel culture is centered around the idea of public shaming and has been defined as an attempt to, quote, ostracize someone for violating social norms, unquote, um, and as it may be gathered, social norms are, of course, subject to change. So the political correctness from 100 or even, say, 50 years ago is, of course, completely different from our understanding of political correctness. And mind you, what is politically correct now at times couldn't be politically correct, let's say 200 years ago, and of course the other way around, right? It used to be politically correct to own slaves and have blackface, right, for Halloween, which now is completely unacceptable and as it should be and inappropriate. So certain phenomena used to be seen differently only even a few decades ago. So the question arises, can a person be cancelled and socially exiled by something they have done during a time of different norms and sensitivities. This is something that I'm struggling with. I don't know the answer to that. I don't have a conclusion. If you do, please share. Um, According to an article written by Pippa Norris, a professor at Harvard University, the controversies surrounding cancel culture are between ones who argue that it gives a voice to those in marginalized communities, while the other argument is that cancel culture is dangerous because it prevents free speech and the opportunity for open debate. If then, in 2004, the Oscar winning actor Tom Hanks was wearing blackface and stereotypical African clothing at a fundraiser, should we avoid watching his movies? Should he be cancelled? Is Jimmy Fallon's darkened face a sign for Halloween? A sign we should never watch his talk show again? Cultural studies scholar Francis Lee states that call out culture leads to self policing. And to my way of thinking, it is rather a cruel practice that leaves no room for being human. Even if you're a celebrity, a politician, you're allowed to make mistakes. It, without a doubt, grants one a form of agency that is desperately needed, but at the same time, it is a senseless extortion. Cancel culture comes across as disproportionately harsh, the cancelers often ignoring context for the sake of action. And context is usually the very thing that may help one understand one's intentions. And I have only one picture to show you, and we're sort of getting there. It's sort of a pay homage, if you will. An excellent example of cancel culture gone wrong is the story of an Australian sprinter, Peter Norman. And let me show you Peter. If you have never heard of Peter Norman, this is the first gentleman on the left without his hand being raised. If you've never heard of Peter Norman, it only sort of proves my point, unfortunately. So in 1968 Mexico Olympics, this is the medal ceremony for the men's 200 meters, running. Crazy people. This is the winner, Tommy Smith. He stands defiantly, head bowed, his black gloved fist thrust in the air. Behind him, with the third place, there's a fellow American, John Carlos, joining with his own Black Power salute. Right? Of course, the gesture is this sort of Black Panthers salute. As an act of defiance aimed at highlighting the segregation and racism burning back in their homeland. So the runner-up, Norman, he just wore a small badge somewhere here. He just wore a small badge that read Olympic Project for Human Rights. And this was an organization set up a year previously opposed to racism in sport. So he had a little reminder, not a little, he had a reminder of also being and expressing his view against racism in sports community. And that was what triggered his cancellation. So him wearing this little badge. So Smith and Carlos were sent home in disgrace. So the winner in the third place, they were sent home in disgrace. They were banned from the Olympics for life, but they were treated as heroes within their Black communities back home, and sort of they sacrificed their personal glory for the cause. So even though they were banned from the Olympics for life, they were still celebrated. Um, Unfortunately for Norman, the badge was enough to effectively end his career. So he returned home to Australia as a pariah, suffering unofficial sanctions and ridicule as the Black Power salutes forgotten men. He never ran in the Olympics again, and as soon as he got home, he was hated, as explained by his nephew, Matthew Norman, who has directed a film, Salute, about Peter's life before and after 1968 Olympics. And his nephew said he suffered to the day he died. So he was cancelled for doing something actually, noble and something that would have been much appreciated and needed. I mean, always and especially now. So a world-class athlete has been cancelled because he spoke against apartheid. His thinking was way beyond his zeitgeist, and for that he became an outcast. So this goes to show how cruel and monstrous cancel culture may be. It does not scrutinize the situation, the circumstances, or ethics. It just ruffles feathers of the mainstream. It is enough to become cancelled. And another example of being cancelled because of something beyond one's control is a Canadian actor, Hayden Christensen, who played Anakin Skywalker in episode 2, Attack of the Clones, and episode 3 as well. Since starring the franchise, the actor has somewhat faded into obscurity. Hayden Christensen had a promising start in his acting career and a number of roles that led to him landing actually the Star Wars gig, and he was like super proud of it. One of his early movie appearances was in The Virgin Suicides, and then he performed in several TV series through the 90s, including Goosebumps and Are You Afraid of the Dark? Unfortunately, the Star Wars movies at best earned him mixed reviews. This is like to put it kindly. Safe to say that he won 2 Golden Raspberries Awards for his performance, which is, not good. And New York Times critic called Christensen's performance timid and stiff and comparable to something one might see on Dawson's Creek. And I don't know what's wrong with Dawson's Creek, so I don't agree with this guy. Christensen hasn't been in any blockbusters since. His story shows the way in which cancellation may be at times random and not entirely justified. If his reason for cancellation was bad acting in a bad movie, there were crimes much more serious than that, and they did not become, they did not result in being cancelled. J.K. Rowling, she's doing just fine despite her transphobic views. She still landed 1.5 billion in sales of computer games Hogwarts Legacy, which also, by the way, sparks controversies and is accused of anti-Semitic motifs. So Christensen withdrew from red carpets, and J.K. Rowling actually struck back. After numerous back and forths with disappointed and angry fans, Rowling published an open letter further outlining her position. In it, she argues that the online public reaction against her is pure censorship. Rowling claims that by the time she decided to support Maya, she must have been on her fourth or fifth cancellation. This was her in 2020, reinforcing her position as the one who is being unjustly attacked. Is cancellation the last resort of censorship? Are the mistakes made by public figures unforgettable and unforgivable? And of course, I want to emphasize I'm not talking about serious crimes or harassments or offenses, right? These must be punished, and cancel culture, I mean, by all means. But for the rest of us and for the rest of them, does the public really demand perfection, right? Can't we, or the celebrities, can they just make a human error? And on July 7, 2020, on Harper's Magazine website, a letter was signed by 153 people who are writers, actors, scholars, philosophers, and the like. And it was called A Letter on Justice and Open Debate, also known as the Harper's Letter. The goal was to defend free speech, and it argued that hostility to free speech was becoming widespread on the political left as well. The authors wrote, quote, editors are fired for running controversial pieces. Books are withdrawn from alleged inauthenticity. Journalists are barred from writing on certain topics. Professors are investigated for quoting works of literature in class. A researcher is fired for circulating a peer-reviewed academic study. And the heads of organizations are outed for what are just sometimes clumsy mistakes. End of quote. The restriction of debate, whether by a repressive government or an intolerant society, invariably hurts those who lack power and makes everyone less capable of democratic participation. And we need to preserve the possibility of good faith disagreement without dire professional circumstances and consequences. We cannot just simply fire people without knowing what has happened. The letter concludes, quote, if we won't defend the very thing on which our work depends, we shouldn't expect the public or the state to defend it for us, unquote. And the arguments I believe they were presented are not groundless. The way I see it, they fear, and I understand why so, that after one slip up without bad intentions, a person may lose their job, respect, and position within a collective. And the signatories of the letter include Salman Rushdie, Noam Chomsky, Margaret Atwood, Francis Fukuyama, but also J.K. Rowling, which is hilarious. So what then is not cancel culture? And are there any other accountability tools and mechanisms that may be employed when one makes an embarrassing and a regrettable mistake? Is issuing an apology, donating to whatever.com charity enough? some media commentators have stated that cancel culture should be transformed into consequence culture. The terms, even though, may be similar, but they have different connotations. So cancel culture is focusing on the effect whereby discussion is limited by a desire to maintain one certain viewpoint, whereas consequence culture focuses on the idea that those that write or publish opinions or make insensitive statements should bear responsibility rather than rejection and be accountable rather than ostracized. Thank you very much for your attention. I'm going to take a sip break.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for keeping the time perfectly. So we're right on time, and this is the moment to start the discussion part of our session. So if anyone among you or anyone of the other people present in the meeting, Justina already has a question, so fire away.
Okay. I have questions to all of the speakers. How would you like me to proceed? One by one or all at once?
It's up to you at this point. So,
The speakers, how would you like the questions to be asked? Okay. So I'll start with a question to Abby. Forgive me if this is too personal. If it is, you don't have to answer, obviously, because I am actually in the process of writing a paper, which I'm going to present at a conference this week, about pregnant film directors who direct serial killer movies. And I wanted to ask you, Abby, if the monstrosity of the mother may in any way be related to the fact that there is a monster growing inside. If there is any kind of connection, especially like mental type of different, state of mind, basically, because the monster is not just the mother, but also the baby inside. Okay, so should I proceed with my questions or should I wait for Abby's answer?
Okay, yeah, Abby, right away. Yeah, let's.
Yeah. First of all, very interested in your research about. I'm very interested that there are multiple pregnant directors that made serial killer movies.
Two.
Two. Okay. Yeah, I think a lot of my research has been kind of about the monstrosity that exists upon the separation post-pregnancy, and the valuing of the child versus the devaluing of the mother post. But for physical research, in rehearsal process, I did use in comparison, the clip from Alien of the monster bursting forth versus I took videos of my pregnant belly of it, of my son moving and elbowing, and relating those two very physical experiences. So I think a lot of my research revolves around centering the mother versus the child and how that separation creates the monster. But I think there's definitely a lot of ideology about this monster brewing inside as well.
Okay, because child growing inside the womb, like the fetus is basically biologically a parasite, and that's like the ultimate monster when you think about it, right? So yeah. Okay, thanks very much.
Yeah.
Next question to Alina. Because you are a comparative literature student, I wanted to ask you if you heard ever about the Polish monster called Bazyliszek.
I haven't, no.
So if I may share my screen, I think you'll find something very interesting. This is Bazyliszek. In the picture, you can find Bazyliszek, and the way of like fighting it, it has got magical eyes and petrifying eyes. So when it looks into its own reflection in the mirror, it also is petrified. But look at the shape; it's cockatrice. It's a like chicken kind of thing compared or like mixed with a dragon. So I think there's definitely an overlap between Filipino monsters and Polish ones, and I think there are many other like from Western culture as well. So I highly recommend you go into Polish culture and find those monsters because they're very similar. Okay, unless you
Thank you.
can you trace the origins of some of those legends? Are they all originally Filipino, or are they maybe inspired by those Western like stories too?
So some of them are inspired by Western. As I mentioned, like the centaur, we have the tikbalang. Some of them are because we have been colonized many times, and also they the way that actually our country was founded is steeped in legend. Like they said that like there were tribes. There were seven datus like they are like princes or kings who came from a neighboring island, which is Panay, and then they sailed through like a barge, and they went to our country, and they tried to set up, like, you know, they kind of colonize it. This was a legend in itself. So even that, so like you see, like they've always said that the Philippines is a melting pot, and we kind of get that. Like even if you look at our people, like we look Chinese, we look Korean, we look Mongolian, and that's just because we have been like we're really a melting pot. So yes, some of the myths and legends, like from up north, the mountainous areas, I can say that definitely they're definitely, I cannot find them anywhere else. But some of the, like the aswang, which is like the quintessential Filipino monster, it's definitely a vampire, it's definitely a shapeshifter, but we added our own twist. It's the only being that can detach from the waste. So yeah, so it's an amalgamation.
Okay, that's fascinating. Like when you think that collective unconscious, it's a legend. It's not. There's definitely something related to that. Thank you very much. And finally, my question to yeah, it is going to be a question, but also a comment to Eva, obviously. Like, is there any way in which cancel culture for serious crime was not actually used and it's still a problematic issue? Yes, there is Roman Polanski, who should have been cancelled back then, should be cancelled now, and yet he still remains a director, and yet we still love him in Poland for reasons unknown, and yet he's still here. So my question would be, do you think that maybe because certain like legends of the screen or whatever, like history, they are just immune to cancellation because there's so much we are grateful for that we just cannot cancel them even if they really deserve it?
I really wish that we could cancel people who deserve this. I agree with you. There's Polanski. I do believe there's still, you know, Woody Allen, who's not entirely cancelled. There is plethora of people, but I think that unfortunately there are certain people who are thought to be so amazing, you know, whose contribution to mainstream culture. I think that there are new charges for Kevin Spacey, and he just started, sort of, he got back into cinema like last week. So I don't know why that is. I do believe we can do without, no matter their genius. I do believe we can do without, you know, their sad movies or ironic sense of humor. We could, and we can do better than this. Or perhaps there should be just more and more pressure put on them. And then apart from social media, the regular quote unquote media should also be supporting. So no breakfast TV shows, nothing of that matter. And perhaps we would eradicate those weeds once and for all,
Yeah.
hopefully. Yeah.
Well, one day maybe, because these aren't like mistakes, like slips of tongue. They
Yeah.
are like proper crimes, which should really be properly dealt
Prosecuted.
with.
Exactly. It's not, you know, calling someone black or appropriating a hairstyle, of course, which is questionable. But at the same time, it is. I don't believe it's comparable to raping a teenage girl, right? Absolutely. Let's say what it is.
And of course, sorry, just that would remind me. Prince Andrew, obviously, he's uncancelable, and he can do whatever he wants because he's Prince Andrew, above the law.
Don't
Great
get me
topic.
started or his I hate the guy. He's so disgusting. It makes me sick. I hope he dies. I'm sorry. I don't feel that well, so I can say things as they are, right? So I hope they
You'll be
cancel
cancelled
him.
for
And
that, which is great.
oh my
I
god,
mean,
don't.
we're
have
not
it
gonna die,
recorded.
so
I mean, wasn't he punished by not being allowed to wear like an official suit for the? I mean, the struggle is real, you guys.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
I'm gonna
All
mute
right.
myself and just think those things now.
Okay, and
Thanks.
we have another participant waiting patiently to ask her question. So, Kinga, it's your turn.
Yeah, okay. So my question is actually similar to Justina's one, but maybe more general because it's to Abby. Because when you talked about this motherhood monstrosity, I thought about monstrosity concern in childhood or in films about children like Omen or Children of the Corn by Stephen King, for example. And I would like to ask you, do you think that they are maybe in some way, they maybe in some way depend on each other, or maybe there is some kind of connection between the motive of monstrous motherhood and monstrous childhood, or maybe they are completely separate? So what is your opinion about it?
Yeah, that's interesting because there are a lot of there's a lot of movies and that revolve around kind of monstrous children, and many of them are children that are kind of in touch with the monster, like the monster talks to them and they're drawing weird things about it. That comes up a lot. But also The Omen, and then we were talking about Polanski, which made me think of Rosemary's Baby, where it's literally Satan incarnate. And Justina's question, but I mean, there's probably some connection between those. To me, most of the time, those children are still often the victims, even though they're in touch and they're friends with, they're the first to kind of come in contact with this ghost or this monster. Oftentimes, they're still, thinking about like The Exorcist or even the Conjuring. But yes, there are some that kind of break the mold, like The Omen, where it's like be a little afraid of children as well. So yeah, that would be really interesting to explore, though. Of like, is there like a distinct trajectory, I guess, between monstrous mother to monstrous child? Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
And if I could follow this up straight away by a question about the film, I just wonder if you are considering using it in any way in your research, because it combines the question of motherhood, monstrosity, and dance all in one, right? I'm talking about Luca Guadagnino's Suspiria. So. Does this, play in any way into your research?
Not overtly. However, I do love both iterations of Suspiria. I've watched the remake as well as the classic original. I think because it deals a little bit less with mother overtly. It's more of like kind of the house mother and taking in, they're technically adults, they're young, but taking in these children. But I think the physicality in those movies is fascinating. So that's the thing about the kind of different angles, as you mentioned before. So I was like, there's a lot of inspiration, there's a lot of pulling, just because I feel like I'm researching it from different perspectives, and so that kind of the physicality, pulling that in, of what is monstrous movement, what does possessed movement feel like in the body, how are we defining that? And in my experience, it's kind of just the opposite of what we define as civil movement, and how we feel comfortable moving through the world. And so looking at Suspiria and, thinking about the back bending or the twisting of limbs in an uncanny way, looking at that from a movement perspective is really interesting.
Thank
I
you.
have
Thank you
a
very much.
question also for Abby. I'm sorry, I forgot how to raise hands on Teams. I apologize. I was trying to, but I couldn't find it. I'm sorry.
This was, what you've done is successful.
I just literally raised my hand. Abby, I have a question to you about the issue of freedom and control, because in my understanding and experience, which is very limited when it comes to dance, dancing is expression of freedom, right? You can freestyle in trance and whatnot. But when you are A, possessed, and B, pregnant, I understand, or at the same time, maybe, I don't know. These movements are controlled by something else or someone else, right? So by this parasite, as Justina said. So how do you mitigate the freedom of movement when you're dancing, or when you dance, or a person dances, and being possessed by a baby, or by being possessed, period?
Yeah, so that is something that was a big part of my research. Is that was my first year of my master's program is when I was pregnant. So I was teaching dance, and I was taking dance, and I was performing while pre-pregnant. But there were limitations, and there is somebody else in control of your body. I think the limitations are different in different places in the world, of what you can eat, what you can drink, how you can move. And so that's definitely something that comes up in the research. Because there is also in dance, there's this expression of freedom, but I think historically also, if you think more of classical dance, if you think of ballet specifically, has very like colonial control roots in it. And I mean, down to the aesthetic preferences of like, there's this, that's a whole other presentation of like Balanchine preferred dancers with small heads, like very highly specific control of the body. And so I think there is this play between this freedom in the body and also technique control that is often present in most of my work is contemporary modern based. So there are specific techniques and ideas and strength and control that is required. And then shifting into this wild, monstrous, emotionally released rage type state is something we've been playing with a lot. But yeah, thinking about the push and pull of both of those, of being, these different types of ideas of dance, but also like different, the difference in how I had to move when I was pregnant versus not pregnant now.
Thank you. Thanks.
Yeah, if I can add something now, I kind of first of all just wanted to say that I loved each of the rest of those presentations. And like I loved all of them, each in their own way. And I'm just very sorry that I can't ask like better questions, because if I'm nursing anything, it's a terrible headache at the moment. so it's this one thing. But Abby, this was so inspirational. I don't know anything about dance, and yet you talked about it in such a way that you made it familiar to me. So it was brilliant. I love what you said about being like haunted by this stereotype of the mother, and I think it's I find links to what I'm going to talk about tomorrow. So you've given me a lot to think about. Amy, Amy. So the second speaker, I loved the mythical pooping bird. That that was absolutely brilliant. But also, I liked how the CIA kind of was also incorporated into that. Like, so if I were to say maybe like what's my favorite mythical monster, it's the CIA, like popping up, every time that there is something to be done right outside of the US, right? Something to be won. There is a CIA agent. And Eva, I think I have a question to you, because that was the only one that I was able to kind of conceptualize in my head. And I was thinking about the aspect of cancel culture with respect to authors, creators who are like gone, right, dead. Because one thing is that we can work towards canceling there's individuals that have been mentioned, like where we can still do something about their kind of them not being celebrated or them being properly punished for their crimes. But I'm thinking about cases where, I don't know, those when you consider like historical figures, I don't know, classical composers, and when you learn about what they did in today's terms, right, they should, like, I don't want to have anything to do with that person, but the artwork they created, that's brilliant. And what do we do about that? Like, is it still an aspect of cancel culture? And I'm sorry if I'm asking a question that you don't like, but it's just something that I wanted to think about.
It's an excellent question. It really is. I know that people say it, but it actually is an excellent question. What do we do with, those bodies? Should we keep them there, right? I was thinking that perhaps I was considering this some time ago, and I was thinking that perhaps all the proceeds should be, given to a charity, but then they might, those people who are guilty of, atrocities, they might actually have families, right? And generations and generations over who may have done nothing wrong. So why they should be punished for something they haven't done? I don't have the answer for that. I would only say that just take the money and give it to charities so we can somehow lessen or help the situation of someone who is in dire circumstances. But we can only perhaps individually boycott on Spotify or on YouTube or not watch those old movies. But it's terrifying. I mean, and I am so grateful. Don't get me wrong, I hate that it had happened, but I'm so grateful for, I hate why it happened, but I'm grateful for Me Too movement because it just opened our eyes that there isn't an environment which is sort of innocent or safe for women, for gay people, for people who are not straight white men, basically, right? Under, over 50. And it's tragic that there's so many things and so many cases, and I felt like 2 years ago, every week there was someone. It's impossible to navigate in a reality like that. And cancel culture is a part of the solution, I understand. It's call out culture. But it's scary to think that had we had Twitter 300 years ago, what would we would have heard? I don't know. This is my honest answer. I just don't know what to do. We could just, if like Justina has a thank you. Yeah, Justina, take over,
Can
please.
I just add something, because this just reminded me of something. Before Twitter, before all of the social media, we had access to people's private thoughts in published letters, even if they were edited and so on. Philip Larkin, probably the best poet of English language, contemporary at least, amazing poetry, so sensitive to nature and human life. Terrible, terrible racist. Not in his poetry, in his letters to his friends. Now, should we censor those letters? Should we know about this? Yes. Should we still read poetry by Larkin? Yes. Should we feel guilty about it? Yes. That's just the human condition.
It's true.
Yeah,
We
I
are
mean,
the
because
monsters.
this made me think of the alternative term that you suggested, the consequence culture. Well, what consequences can you speak of in the case of someone who has been dead for 300 years, right? That they are no longer bear any consequences in any case, right? So
Yeah.
This kind of
But we can always, if we can, knock out monuments, we can certainly break CDs, burn, portraits, or not name children in his name, right?
yeah. Absolutely, but I did want to perhaps switch to something more positive, because I wanted to ask Anya one more question. She ended up on a very constructive note, saying that the myths and the monsters are the expression of the resilience and the force of the human spirit. And I was wondering whether, like how prevalent or how consistent this is in the folklore, because I can think of so many examples in our cultures where the traditional or folk tales or even monster tales see the protagonist outsmart the monster, learn something from it, and so on. But there are so many which are just not this positive, right? You get everyone killed and it all ends in tragedy. Think of Brothers Grimm. Some of these tales are pretty depressing, and they end badly, very badly. So is there anything because you said that the Filipino people are extremely positive and optimistic and so on. So how, what's the proportion? Let's put it this way.
Okay. So I'd like to answer this question using a European myth, the Baba Yaga. I'm actually quite fascinated by her because sometimes and she has a hut with the legs of a chicken. I mean, and she flies around on a mortar and pestle. I mean, wow, wow. So first of all, the Baba Yaga, of course, she's fearsome. And there are instances wherein she causes men and she causes people to have untimely deaths. On the other side of the scale, she can appear to be cruel but just. Like she actually, there are tales wherein the Baba Yaga, like she actually punishes the bad people and she rewards the good people. So in that way, I think there's a polarity there. It's literally there are literally some instances where where our heroes escape unscathed, and some instances where they just don't, where they just die. So this is just I think in direct proportion to life, wherein sometimes like bad things happen and sometimes good things happen. But despite that, the folklore like it imbibes in our psyche something positive and something I want to say resilient again, but that's a very Western that's a very Western that's a very Western concept actually, and it's just I used it because it's something that people will recognize, especially after the pandemic. But what I want to say is that Filipinos are like the bamboo. There's an essay written. There's an essay written about this. Like we are pliant like the bamboo. So when it's time to, when the hardships come, we bend. We bend and then we shoot straight up. So when it's time for us to bend, we bend. And when it's time for us to grow, we grow. So I think that's the direct proportion that it's directly proportionate to how life circumstances are. And I hope I answered your question, Slavomir.
Right. Yeah.
I say that correctly?
Thank you very much, and thank you all for this very lively discussion. The remote sessions have this kind of reputation of being, detached, everybody in their separate bubble and so on. This has been the exact opposite, right? It's been a pleasure chairing this session, and yeah, thank you very much. And I'm looking forward to, seeing you tomorrow. Yeah. All right.
So everybody, sorry, I
go
just
ahead.
asked a question without being recognized by the chair. I would like to get in contact with you. So can I send a group email to all, and let's just start maybe let's continue this chat by email or any other